Hello, and good right afternoon. Welcome to the panel in which we will discuss a different sort of love, because as you know, the theme of this year's Eikon is loves. And the Greeks, yeah, I'm going ancient Greeks here, defined four forms of love. First is philia, which is, they call it brotherly love, but we can call it the love of friendship or of siblings. Next is storge, which is a familial love, the love of a parent to a child or a child to a parent. Then there's agape, that's the love of God. And finally, of course, eros, the passionate love, the romantic love, the love you get a lot of fiction about. So much fiction. There's some fiction that's about storge and some about agape. We'll mostly talk about philia here. I picked this topic for a couple of reasons. One of them is that, to my mind, it is a huge driver of the action in Anne's Rat trilogy. Also, I've in recent years, I've found myself on the asexual spectrum. Philia has always been my jam, and now I understand why. So in this panel, we're going to talk about how non-romantic love can drive a plot. And we're also going to recommend some stories and books where it is prominent. It'll be fun. So my first question, and I'd like each of you to answer in turn, is why shouldn't every major relationship in fiction be romantic? Why shouldn't? Why shouldn't just, let's make everyone a couple? And by the way, Delia, if you wanted to do your thing about comedy, you can put that here.
So, honestly, why shouldn't, there should be plenty, because there are plenty of people for whom that, a lot of us, it's an important kind of relationship. But it also, if that's the only story out there, it pretends that that's the only important relationship, which is not true. Friendship can be an incredibly important relationship in someone's life, whether they're asexual or not. And when you're asexual, to have somebody say, well, we're just friends, like that's not a powerful bond, that's kind of insulting, right? And stories are how we see the world around us, and if no stories have your kinds of people or relationships in them, that's a horrible, horrible way to be.
Well, it's very hard for me to tell. Well, because it's boring is the short answer. But a slightly longer answer is that I think that we do it because the forms of Western literature have always been, the major forms have always been comedy, which traditionally ends with marriage, or tragedy, which ends with death, and so comedy which ends with marriage is. The trajectory of comedy is from stasis to anarchy, to making order come back again. So order, anarchy, and order. And the most convenient symbol of a return to social order is marriage, because that is the basis of social order in many, many societies. And it certainly was in ancient Greece, so which is where we get this all from. And and it was picked up finally. I mean, sometimes the marriage was not the most important part. It became more important in Western literature, especially with Renaissance drama and Shakespeare, and which was also what was going on in France and England did very similar things. However, we now know that there are many other kinds of social stability, one of which is a community that is not simply based on bloodlines. And therefore, we've got a lot more latitude, not only in who we can love eros, but we have a lot more latitude in how we can define a family, which is a model of social order, is people getting along in community. And therefore, those ties whether they be of religion, which certainly in America is less important anyway in New York than it used to be. You have other ties, and those ties can just be of friendship, of community, of the kind of community that you find in a science fiction community, in a writing community, in children's literature. Anything that's a community is going to yield friendships as well as romances, and it will yield many more friendships than romances. So in order to talk about the modern world, or to talk about the society that a model of society, we have many more choices if we deal with friendship and redefining family.
Yeah, I thank you, Didi, for. Okay. Thank you, Didi, for giving us a chance to dig into the context that we're escaping from first. I do have an answer to your question, but first I just want to add a little bit to what Delia said, which is that in fantasy, for instance, we're almost always writing about, or where until fairly recently, we've been writing about a past, a pre-technological past that's based on the European Middle Ages, or the European Renaissance, or even the European 19th century. And marriage was the binder for that. Marriage was a conclusion, certainly for women, but also for men. Men married late because they couldn't afford to keep a family, and until you could keep a family financially, you had no business being married. So there was a real closing of things and a creating of a circle with marriage, whether there was romantic love to it or not. So I think that's another reason. But because a lot of fantasy comes out of myth and fairy tale from a period where marriage was the logical conclusion and love was the ideal in a marriage, if it were possible, I think that's part of where this comes from. There were many, many companionate marriages, which was, in some senses, a friendship where you also had babies, because that was expected of you. But I think a sort of interesting sidebar to this is the tradition of, not just marrying your best friend for romantic love, but marrying your best friend because you're good companions. But I would say the reason that we don't want every narrative plot line and every emotional plot line to be about romance, about physical romance, is because it's not realistic. When I finished my first novel, I almost immediately started another novel that I never finished. But I was, 26, 27. So I'd been out of university about, 6 years. And I was at a point where we were all turning into adults. We'd all started to have jobs or go to graduate school. And we're on the road to becoming who we were going to be. And I had very, very tight friendships, mostly with women from my school. And my novel was about a young wizard woman, and wizards tend to be asexual, not as much now, but certainly in those days, since our model was Gandalf and like that there was just, and Ged for that matter, they were just assumed wizards are kind of by default asexual unless you make them sexual. So she goes on she's called to basically do a quest to right a wrong in the kingdom. And she goes to see all her friends who are also in their 20s, and are doing various things. One is traditionally married, one is in, as it were, wizard grad school. And I really knew that I was striking new ground, but that basically the novel was going to be about these friendships. And there's a side romance plot that doesn't even have to do with her. And I'm really sorry I never found the way to finish that book, because at the time, I remember telling someone I was working on this, and they said, oh, you'll never sell that. But I think since then, people, especially women, have really found that we want to speak our truths in our fiction, even when it's not something traditional or seen traditionally. And I think that for women, friendship is critical in our lives. And it's taken a little bit of courage and vision to start making that a central plot point the way it is in our actual lives, rather than to use the forms and the patterns that we are used to reading. I do want to say something for men's friendship, though, or am I just now doing the whole panel solo? May I start talking about men's friendship in context?
Sure.
Okay. I actually did a whole radio show about this once. Male friendship was the romantic ideal in Western culture for a long time, and in, what do you want to call it, Hebrew culture, David and Jonathan is is an idealized friendship. Now, in our day and age, we love the idea that it was romantic, but it's just as likely that, you know, these male friendships were where you put your passion. You know, you married for duty and maybe companionship, but there was a time when people felt that men and women had nothing to say to each other. Literally, that was what your culture believed. And as a result, the people you were close to and intimate with were the people of your own sex. I could go on and on about this, and maybe I will. But what I do want to say right now is that I think it is one of the things we've lost to becoming a society that's hyper-aware of sexuality and has named all of these ways you can be sexual with people, is that it is now difficult and shameful for a Western man to love another man without eros. And I feel for you, I do.
My next question is, some of the questions are going to be for you as readers, some as writers. This one is definitely as writers. How is Philia different than Eros as a plot driver? When you're writing, how does it make the work different? And how is it different for you as a writer?
It's not a question I've thought about very much, and now I'm trying to see what the difference is. Because I'm tempted to say, and I think I would be wrong to say, well, the difference is there's no sex, right? Why should it be that different? But obviously there's a difference. You can have a romantic relationship that is not a sexual relationship, and so that has to obviously be different from a passionate friendship that's not romantic. But I'm not sure. I suspect they probably shade in between that we want to draw a line saying, no, this is this and this is this, just like this is science fiction and this is fantasy, where the truth is there are things that sort of move back and forth over the line. So I'm not 100% sure what the biggest difference is. It may be a question of where they're socially and culturally positioned, right? So a passionate friendship doesn't have maybe a particular kind of social legitimation. I'm a professional writer, I speak English really well. But you know what I mean, where romantic relationships have that, now we have an official, this marriage is blessed, this family is a family, this is, where friends often don't have that official sort of, it's not part of there is a social structure, you could be blood brothers with somebody or whatever, but there's less of and now you have a certificate, now you're friends, right?
Well, I was going to mention friendship rings too.
Friendship rings, yes. But like, for instance, being married often has legal implications, where being friends doesn't often have legal implications.
Well, for me, it's the difference between not just writing an adult book and writing, because mostly what I write is about friendship, because there's no, I'm not that interested in pre-adolescence, my girlfriend-boyfriend stuff, or even girlfriend-girlfriend stuff. It just doesn't, I did not feel that way myself. I cannot imagine what it would be like, and so I can't put it in my books.
To give context, a lot of your work is middle grade.
Yeah, this book is middle grade. But I also think that there is, the project of middle grade fiction is the romance of family and friendship, and to find out exactly how these units, as you negotiate your relationships within a family and you negotiate your relationships with the people you go to school with, you're learning about what it means to be a friend, what it means to be an enemy, what it means to be mean to someone, and that your actions towards another human being have consequences, and therefore it is the primary driver of middle grade fiction. When friendship, I am an only child. My parents were quite elderly. They died when I was fairly young. My family has been my friends pretty much all my life. And I know that this was something that not only occupied me more or less consciously as I was growing up, as I was looking for other other people to contact with and how exactly to negotiate those relationships. But it has remained that way as an adult. And I find that my friendships are a great deal of what drives my life. You know, having someone call me and say, you know, this horrible thing happened to me, I need to talk to you, that can set off an entire, you know, I go over there, I meet somebody else, we talk, you know, you can get caught in the middle in a good way, you can get caught in the middle in a bad way. It is a plot driver, being a human being with friends. Other people are plot drivers. And if you either really like them or really dislike them, then that's going to have different consequences. That's what makes a story move. There can be, you know, explosions, external things, but basically what drives any really good and engaging story is the emotional plot. And the emotional plot is usually driven by friendship.
Also, a friend can be the one who helps the protagonist get through things and get to things, if you're talking about how things are driven. And I've just had this really good idea about my current work in progress. But I have a really short answer to the question, which is sex makes you stupid. So when you're writing about a genuine romance that is more than just emotional, you can allow your characters to be nutty. And that can drive the plot. I was trying to think, like, who are the really powerful friends in my work? And the one that comes to mind is, it's the sequel to Sword's Point. It hasn't been translated yet, but it's called The Privilege of the Sword. And about half of it, I mean, it's got a lot of things running through it, but the heroine ends up having a best friend who's a boy of about her age, 15, and they're both living in this very strange household. And they become friends in part because they're the only kids there. And they're really good friends, and they get up to all sorts of mischief together. And by the end of the book, they're rolling around on the floor kissing. And the difference and the boy is interested in her before she's interested in him. And so he starts acting really weird to her and getting mad at people she talks to, and, you know, getting mad at her, and she can't figure out why. And it's because for him, it has shifted from friendship into romance, into physical desire and romance. And he doesn't quite know what to do with it. She hasn't got a clue. And then they sort of sort it all out. And because they're friends first, they get along very well through the end of the book, but they need to pass through that channel.
Can usually, when there's friendship and romance, romance is primary in fiction and is often considered in society. How can it work the other way? How possible, likely, doable is it to make, when romance is an option, to make it secondary?
Well, I think it's eminently doable if you focus on, for instance, societies where women often are off in their own areas and have minimal contact with men. In fact, there's a very complex society. There's a whole, women exercise power through these really broad networks and have this domain over which they basically rule, and yet that's often not reflected in fiction. They talk about it as though, well, it's, you know, the men running everything, and the important thing is hooking up with the men, and the men are the powerful ones, and the women are weak and don't have any agency. I think if you shift your focus over from where everyone assumes the power is to how people are actually living and what those relationships actually are, then you've shifted the focus over to the friendship and made that more important than the romance. Because if you're living in a society, like, we'll go back to the ancient Greeks, right, where your father was marrying you off and you were spending all your time with the other girls and hardly knew any of the boys, maybe you know, talked to them every now and then, or you had brothers or whatever, all of those relationships, you get married, that's not you've still got all those existing relationships with all the women who you've grown up with, who you have these various relationships with, and that's going to be your primary focus. That's going to be the thing that's important to you. And so when you write that fiction as though the big important relationship is the husband-wife, that's sort of pretending all those other things don't exist, which isn't actually the case. And I think in Western societies now that's less the case, but it's still a thing I think that happens. Literature ignores all the women's friendships and pretend, sometimes even will flat out, oh, women, they hate each other, they can't really be friends, they're always in competition, they're always clawing each other's eyes out because they're jealous. Sort of really, I think deliberately and trying very hard to pretend that those networks and friendships don't exist.
I mean, look at Frodo and Sam, which is one of the last of the great romantic male friendships in 20th century literature. And people respond very strongly to it. It's really, really moving. And it has a narrative arc.
I'm thinking 5 things at once, which makes it very difficult to pick one to say. It's a very interesting question, but I also think that it depends, that there are many books, a lot of books that are action-based actually do focus more strongly on a friendship than a romance, because they're not, and maybe for the reason that that some of them are written by people who can't actually imagine a romantic relationship that takes with a woman in it who has action other than as a buddy, or a backup, or that they put in romantic tension because they think they should. But when action is foregrounded, then, and you've got a bunch of people dealing with it. I mean, The Lord of the Rings is really all about friendship. Yeah. And there is one tiny little romance in there which I just frankly does not persuade me in the slightest, even though, you know, Tolkien and his wife had a wonderful relationship, and he loved her all his life, and she was his Luthien, and he was barren, and it was, but he never wrote about that. What he wrote about was a bunch of people who were brought together in order to do something and learned to get along. And so it's not that, and that is finally more important for Faramir than his relationship with Arwen, with his relationship with Eowyn. Thank you. It comes out of a culture that we are beginning to lose, which is about duty to something, and about honor. And when you're talking about those particular things, especially, you get men's friendships, but you also get women's friendships, I think. And I find that very interesting, because I think when you're writing fantasy, it's easier to write about the big topics, about ideals, about nobility, and I don't mean blood, I mean, you know, nobility of the heart, about honor, about life and death, than it is in realistic fiction, which is not like writing.
What's a happy ending look like if Eros isn't, if you know, if a couple riding it off into the sunset isn't an option?
If the couple riding off into the sunset is the option, the rhetoric of the whole thing is going to be sending you there so that the desire of the reader is to see those two people happy together. If you get to pick what the ending is, I think, when friendship is the option, then the way you would do it if it were a romantic friendship is they're not friends, and, you know, by the end they are. For that to be a satisfying ending as opposed to something that the book starts with, right? I think the tension has to come from somewhere else. The narrative tension has to come from somewhere else if the book has friendship as a major component, but the ending is not the friendship. I mean, I'll say Frodo and Sam, even though, you know, I could spin something different, but it's just, what it is the friends have a common goal. Never mind Frodo and Sam, just in general. I think it's what Delia and Anna have both been talking about as well, which is the plot is the plot, and the friends have a common goal, or achieve a common goal, and then the goal is reached by the friends together. In some ways, it's more social. It's a social narrative rather than maybe even than a heroic narrative. Maybe that would be a way to put it.
Yeah, this is not very well formed in my thoughts at this point, but a difference between a narrative that's about integration of people into a community and a story that's about an individual achieving a position that's just their position. Although getting married is very often framed as integration into a community. I think in modern romance stories it's not so much, right? It's an individual goal, whereas a story about friendship is a story about a number of people coming together and achieving a thing and maybe solidifying their relationship.
Although now I'm looking to see a friendship narrative that is structured exactly like a romance narrative. It would be an interesting experiment to see it.
Offered in the Grey Mouser.
No, but they're already pals. I mean, they're great. And, you know, Holmes and Watson, they're already pals.
No, because they meet. I mean,
the
whole trajectory.
And the Robin Hood and Little John.
Elementary would be a good. Have you watched Elementary? Oh. Have any of you watched Elementary at all? Yeah, it's awesome, isn't it? Yeah, I love Elementary, and because of it is in fact that the mysteries are, they're not that great. And I was just watching it for something to do while I was beading, and so and I was like, I don't know if I like this, but it's the arc of their friendship. They start out with an official, she's his sober companion, and he's like, I didn't even hire you; it was my father who hired you, and over the seasons, they develop this really strong friendship in a really realistic way. The character arcs are fabulous. And so I think that's an example of a story that's about the friendship.
And I think there are a lot of series stories about friends, including Holmes and Watson, including Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, in which including Robin Hood and Little John, there are a lot of these. There are always men where they meet cute, have a fight, and then become besties. And that's a really appealing thing, but it can only happen once. All right, unless you're doing a very long TV series.
Yeah,
you're putting that arc in amongst other things.
Well, and actually, one of the things I really like about Elementary is that Watson is a woman.
Yeah.
And there's no, and the show writers have said there's not going to be a romance. This is going to be a friendship, which I also really love, because the assumption that, you get a man and a woman together, they're gonna, are they, will they, won't they? And I really like that you say, no, we're adults and we can be friends. Not even if we're both heterosexual, we're not gonna be attracted to every person of the appropriate gender who we meet, And I really like that. That's the thing that I really love about Elementary. And I wish there were more stories like that.
I feel like the snake in the garden here. In my own relationships, I'm totally with you, but every time I write, I try to mess it up with sex. Because
that's what, you have to mess things up or there's no exciting story.
Thank you very much. Because, going back a million years, the reason I wrote Swords Point at all was this sort of, Holmes and Watson, Fafhrd the Grey Mouser, let's make them be lovers too! And then, boom, I was off and running.
You said everything that positive. I mean, I'm just going to be repeating it in slightly different words about coming together in community, because that is the. It's just frames.
But now I'm wondering if you have people who are all right, just work with me here. I know I'm thinking about this. How would you do a ride off into the sunset as friends kind of thing?
Well, they have to be two people who are basically loners, and it would have to be task-based. That there's a thing that they are either looking for or must do, which is going to take them. I mean, a lot of those buddy movies, the adventure buddy movies are that. It's two guys who really can't get along very well with anybody else. A lot of mysteries are set up like this, where you've got It's people of an equal power, which is always a slight problem, but you've got the detective, and then you've got the sidekick, who is both the comic relief and the guy who pulls the chestnuts out of the fire when the brilliant detective has screwed things up. So that model already exists, and the happy ending each time is that between the two of them, even though they don't get along with anybody else, they get along together, and they work together in order to solve a crime that nobody else
the happy ending isn't just two friends. That's the other thing. The happy ending is that somebody who was alone discovers that now they're part of a community and that no one cared about them, or they felt no one cared about them before. Now they're in a mutual aid, mutual respect, mutual love situation where they were isolated before. And it isn't necessarily just two people, right?
And that's basically what this book is about. It's about a little boy who really, he has absolutely no idea how to associate with anybody else without there being violence on one side or another. And he he finds himself in a community where he learns slowly by himself for reasons that, you know, for outside reasons and inside reasons, that how to get along with people and how to become self-reflective when usually he just reacts and doesn't think about it. He's taught by a library how to think about himself and how to deal with people.
There are also a lot of books for children and even teens that in which what the kid learns is how to be a friend, how to have friends. Because it is a skill. It is a skill, and it's not a skill everybody has. When I went to a really smart women's college, I came from a good high school, so I had friends because I had other weird kids like me. But many of my friends there had literally never had a close friend that they could trust because they came from smaller communities where they were the only kid who read Lord of the Rings or whatever. And I remember watching them learn very fumblingly how to be a friend, how to trust other people, all that.
Now, I wonder if that's common in kids' stories for an obvious reason, right? That's a thing you're working out when you're in middle school or whatever, and not in adult stories, even though adults would be interested in it, because the assumption is you've already worked this out in high school, and you've already got all your friends, and why would you need to make friends after that? Because our assumption, you know, then you get out of school, and then you get married, and what else do you need to do? Your life is over at that point, right? You have children and set them loose on the seas of discovering friendship. So I wonder if that's not helpful, that we assume that the only problem that adults might have would be romantic, and it would be super helpful to talk about how to make friends with other adults. Making friends among kids is actually a very different thing, right? And making friends as an adult is something that we don't talk about very much.
I think we've also come to the realization, which I didn't have when I walked in and now seems so obvious, there's a lot of male buddies. There's a big tradition in literature and in our literature as well of male friendship. It's very strong, it's very powerful, it's very appealing. And so what the world needs now is, you know, male-female friendship stories and more female-female friendship stories. So we're done, okay.
I want to mention one more structure of friendships, which is the superhero team-up, where they usually meet up, they usually have a fight, and then the happy ending is they beat a bad guy up.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a pretty standard plot line, actually. There's almost no other way to introduce two superheroes together. That's how you do it, right?
In fact, so could we do a female thing that follows the male buddy line? You know, what would the female equivalent of, you know, Robin Hood on one side of the water, Little John on the other, there's a log across, and neither is going to let the other cross the bridge. They meet in the middle, they have a big fight, and then they're best friends. They fall in the water, and then they're best friends.
I don't know. I can't imagine women having that interaction that way. It would be like, nice dress, and the other would be like, it has pockets.
Someone who writes really good female, just, you know, all sorts of friendships, and a lot of the major friends is Laurie J. Marks, who has written a quartet which should be translated by everybody.
We will have an entire segment for Rex. Don't you worry about that.
But that was there have been people who have done this. They haven't sold that well. But I think that they will be very, very important in years to come as people realize that the time has come for this literature, that they were so far ahead of their time that nobody wanted to read it.
Well, let's I want to go back to my thing and break it down a little bit, which is human, territory that neither will cede to the other. So for women, and I think some of this is that, you know, if we're all monkeys, men may be a little more physically territorial than women. I don't know. What could be like a woman-woman territory thing? A house? A kitchen?
Probably. Yeah.
A person? A
We're
child?
not going to the audience yet. You can put your hands down.
And you're having great ideas. I can see it in your face. Okay.
I think you're right, and it's not like women will be why we would never fight with each other. We're all women. We're all part of that hive mind. It's, you know. It's true, we are. No.
You're either
There's
all a hive
definitely-
mind or you all hate each other.
Exactly.
Or both.
Both at the same time. It's like Schrodinger's woman, right? You're right. They would take a different form, wouldn't it? There would be a lot more sort of verbal negotiating, like, boy, I sure would like to get across that bridge. Oh, wouldn't that be nice? Well, maybe tomorrow, or I don't know how that would work out.
Don't make it a bridge.
It wouldn't be a bridge.
What's the
You're right. The
equivalent
bridge
of
isn't right.
territory that both of them want, neither wants the other one to have. In the end, they do something. It doesn't have to be a physical fight or even a fight, and end up laughing and being besties. What would that
There
thing
would be things. So sadly, the first things that come to mind are the standard romantic. If you've got co-wives competing for the husband, or co-wives or not co-wives competing for the interests of their children. But there's more than that in women's lives. There's more than that. A kitchen or something, right?
There's more than that in women's situations and
Absolutely.
women's personalities. There are human beings who happen to have breasts and vaginas and whatever else who behave territorially. And it's not, and maybe the only place they can be territorial is about their garden or their kitchen.
Or maybe garden, or maybe the Bridge and Little John and Robin Hood plot is maybe. I mean, most guys don't act like that, right? How many of y'all guys out there, your best friend you met, you beat each other up, and then you were best friends?
But it's
Maybe
such
when
a
you were
trope
11.
it's such a trope in literature. Maybe we've all evolved beyond beating each other up to become best friends. But Tom Sawyer, they roll on the ground and then they go have a root beer.
Yeah, that's
maybe
the common.
That's just what boys don't do anymore. But they used to.
Or at least according to the literature, they did, which
Or
is
Kirk Spock.
Okay,
what about Kirk Spock? Now we're talking about Slash.
Here's
Nope.
a girl's friendship that has a little bit of that dynamic, which is Bonnie and Sylvia in Joan Aiken's Wolves of Willoughby Chase, because Bonnie is afraid of absolutely nothing and is very, very friendly, but it has a tendency to be a little bit on the judgmental side about people who aren't like her, like nobody else in the world ever. And Sylvia comes to live with them, and she's an orphan, and she is very, very shy, and she is very, very girly, and she is afraid of everything. And there's a certain amount of tension at the beginning of their relationship because Sylvia's used to being looked down on, but you feel bad for her, and Bonnie has to learn that there is another kind of strength than the kind of strength that she thinks there is, and that Sylvia has it, and that is a genuine friendship that grows out of not a mutual antipathy, but a mutual discomfort and power imbalance. It balances the power.
The great female friendship that everybody loves and probably loves the books because of it is Anne of Green Gables, right? I have not read the books, but I've seen the movie. Anne and Diana.
It's a standard.
That's kind of the template for that. And again, that's a girl who's never had any friends and meets a girl who's sort of, normal and utterly seduces her with her wonderfulness. And there's no indication of sexuality there, even when they're adults. And the relationship lasts through into adulthood.
And that's also a story of an individual who's isolated being integrated into a community, also, very much so.
Yes, and so let's think about that maybe one of the elements of this, in one of the plot lines, is the person who's brought in through friendship, the loner who's brought in through friendship. Cool. And unlike some of the male myths, which some of the women writers are trying to adapt, the ideal is not to be a loner. The ideal is not for them to then go off by themselves. So that male loner is also a very romantic
Like Shane,
image.
right?
Shane, exactly.
It's a different story. Shane, the male ideal is he's the loner, he comes and he saves them, and tragically he must leave. And where the other story that we're talking about is Shane comes in, he's a loner, he saves everyone, and they're like, stay, Shane! And Shane turns around and stays. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Shane. Yeah.
Shane,
Come back, Shane! Yeah.
Don't make me cry. So actually, I would be very surprised if any of you knew these books, but Terry Windling in the 80s created a series called Border Town that was for older teens. And oh my God, somebody knows these. And we all wrote them together. They were a group project. And the almost every single one of those was loner, miserable kid comes to, magical city on the border between Elfland and the modern human world, and discovers community and friendship, usually, very often through the arts, which is another important thing, for us anyway, that the whole mythos was, you're going to make music, you're going to paint, you're going to find other people who care about the things that nobody but you cares about, and then you'll be home.
Yes, you also edited a Border Town book.
Oh yeah, I did. We revived it.
With Holly Black.
Yeah. Holly was one of the kids who grew up with Border Town, also Cory Doctorow. It turned out that this whole generation of hot young writers, there were like only 100 copies of that book sold. Well, there were several of them, and they were all bought and read by the people who then became the next generation of good writers. So they wanted to come into our world and play. Terry wasn't available to edit, so I co-edited with one of these writers who was Holly. And we went around finding the people who had grown up reading these, but we couldn't tell them what it was for, so we had to have these really strange conversations at dinner at conventions to find out who knew about the books and wanted to write a story, and then they all came in.
Listening to these was really funny, because I couldn't say anything, and I'm sitting there.
So we had Cat Valente, and it was really...
Cat's story in that is I think that's the point where I entirely fell in love with her writing. That's A Voice Like a Whole. It's an amazing story. You should all read it.
So just in case you're wondering, and do enjoy reading English, although it also exists as an audiobook, not a bad one. The new one, the one that was done for the next generation, is called Welcome to Border Town. It's edited by Ellen Kouchner and Holly Black. No, I'm sorry, it's Holly Black and Ellen. Alphabetical order. Fameable order.
If you can think of one you'd like to talk about, tell us about a non-romantic love relationship that you've written about. A specific relationship, if you can tell us a little bit about.
Mine's almost too easy, right? Because the main character of the trilogy, I'm cheating, she's not human, right? So she doesn't have romantic relationships. And the whole...
Yes, because no non-human character has ever had...
Well, no, it's not that no non-human character has ever had. I guess I'm very sensitive to the, look, it's autistic representation, but it's a robot. Right, that's not very helpful. And so I don't want to say, look, it's non-romantic representation. She's not human. But since she's a ship, her expected normal relationships are very different from expected human relationships, except she's no longer a ship and doesn't have access to those anymore. Like, most of her body is gone. She's just one human body left, and she doesn't fit anymore into those things. And not the only arc, but one of the big arcs is, first of all, that relationship between her and Varden, who really have a contentious relationship at the beginning, partly because Varden has no idea who she is, even though she knows her. And
starts off as a bit of a jerk.
A little bit of a jerk. Varden's just a little tiny bit of an annoying person at the beginning. A little self-centered, just a tiny bit. And of course, part of the arc by the end is Breck being part of a bigger community with not just things reconciled with Varden, but with a crew and a ship who she has to hash things out with, because that relationship is weird, right? So it's almost too easy. My trilogy, definitely.
But I like hearing you talk about it, because it's going to have your insights into it, and like what pleased you about writing that?
One of the things, I just started out with the characters, but I actually did toy with the idea of ending with a romantic pairing, because that's the standard ending, right? But the more I thought about it, the more that didn't feel right. And actually, I occasionally will get emails from disappointed readers that I did not end with Breck and Varden romantically paired. And I totally understand where that's coming from. But I had become increasingly frustrated with watching like a TV show or reading a book, and I'm enjoying the characters just interplaying, and all of a sudden it's will they, won't they, right? And it's always if there's a guy and if there's a woman, well, obviously they're going to be romantically involved, or you'll go through an action movie, right? And all of a sudden at the end, boom, the one woman on the crew had to be romantically involved with the biggest guy. Why? This wasn't there was nothing in the story that meant this, but that's how you have to tie it up. And it was just becoming more and more frustrating to me. Not because I dislike romances. I will occasionally read the actual romance novel because they could be super fun, and I really enjoy them. But as a default ending, that has become very frustrating to me. I wish more people would think about the possibility of maybe not forcing characters into a romance just to hem up the skirt, you know?
I also am interested in hearing you talk about Brecht's relationship with Lieutenant Hahn, because to me that's that drives the entire plot of the trilogy.
And absolutely not romantic and absolutely not sexual. Although I'm not sure I know the words to talk about it because it's because she loves on as a ship, and ships love officers, ships love people who could be captains. Any of you who have read the trilogy know that's the conversation near the end of the trilogy where they're working out what that relationship is. Ships don't love other ships, ships love people who can be captains. But On in particular is a favorite, and there's a weird power differential there too, because on the one hand, Lieutenant On can order the ship around. On the other hand, the ship is really big. And far, far stronger than any of the crew on the ship. And so they're never going to relate as equals. And I think Lieutenant On may or may not be particularly aware of just how much the ship loves her, right? But it's a very different relationship from your standard friend relationship or romantic or sexual relationship. It's got a different basis, right?
Delia?
It's difficult because I don't want to talk too much about this book because you've got that it's about friendship, but I don't want to talk about
Sell
the plot
it.
too much.
Sell that book.
There's a difference between selling it and giving it away.
Spoilers.
Yeah, that's okay.
Sell it, don't spoil it.
And so, yeah, that's very clever. And the one that's most on my mind at the moment is my work in progress, which is for adults, and it's got lots of friendships in it, but it's got 3 major plot lines, it's got 3 point of view characters, it's really complicated, and there is no happy ending because it's about the Franco-Prussian War and the Commune, and like half of the cast dies.
Wait. But happy ending means reader satisfaction.
Well, right,
And you're
yeah,
going
that
to
is
get reader
true.
satisfaction.
Yeah.
So what is it? Do you know that?
The most interesting character to me at the moment is a woman who is dressing as a man, but she does not, and thinks of himself as a man when he's dressed as a man because he's living in a man's society, but is actually, if they had a word for it, would be gender fluid, and would be someone who didn't need to identify as either male or female. That's what this person is. But there's no way to think about that in French. And there was absolutely no way to think about that in the 19th century. You could be a frigid woman, or you could be an effeminate man, but you couldn't be not one or the other. The friendships and the way, as an artist, this person negotiates their emotional life is very much on my mind right now, and trying to negotiate friendships with women who thinks he's a guy and think that the only way that they can relate to a man is to seduce him, and men who think that being an artist and a man means that you're sleeping with all of your models and you're going to drink really hard and you're going to behave in a certain, artistic male way, and trying to find a way to be in that society without, and has a very good friend who is helping him negotiate these shoals and tells different truths to all the different friends who are surrounding them, because clearly this person has a secret. And so, and one of them is that the woman she is Jewish, and so that's one of the secrets she will share with his friends. But there are others, and they're all different. So that he has slightly different relationships with all the people in his life, and it's complicated. But it's really interesting to think about all the different ways that, because you're slightly different friends with different people, you know. It depends on who they are and what place they take in your life. And you can be really, really fond of them, but there could be things that they just don't know about you because that's not the kind of friends you are. So that's what I've been thinking about, which...
No, it makes a lot of sense, and I'm so excited. I love getting to read the chapters. I'm going to talk for a moment then about Sherman 10, which is a group effort. It's a prequel. All of the Swords Point books are written completely out of order, so don't read them. If you want to read more, don't read them in order of publication. Read them in order of chronology, and it's on my website. So Sherman 10 takes place 15 years before this book, and is written by a group of writers together with me. And they're sexy little buggers, these other writers. And everybody's having sex all the time, and most friendships turn into sex. And the one character for whom that is not true, and everybody's either, we've gone beyond bi. No, there's some major characters who are extremely bi, but there's a lot of same-sex love and relationships because all of our writers, including me, feel that this is underrepresented, and it's fun to have something that's adventurous and, you know, swordsy, and yet has a lot of same-sex relationships. And diversity. But there's one character who is, I don't want to say too much because in case you read it, but who has no interest in sex
And is the best character.
thank you, and I had to sell her so hard to the rest of the writers, but I think she's the best character. But as a result, what happens is that everybody else in this highly sexed story has to relate to her, and she's a her.
Although that is not how they
no,
relate to her.
At first, some people think she's a boy, but anyway, but she's like, yeah, I'm a girl, so what? So I'm doing all these boy things, so what? But everybody else has to relate to her without sex. And it's really fun watching them all figure out who they are with a character with whom, and there's also a lot about power in my books, as you probably know, especially this series. And she's not really interested in power. She's not interested in power at all, really, because she's a major intellectual.
She's interested in math.
Yeah, she's interested in math. And she's not interested in sex, so how do you relate to this person? And some of these characters just bounce right off her. And there's one character in particular who's very interested in power and sex and discovers that it's kind of restful having someone who is interested in neither. So that was a fun exploration to do in this series.
Yeah, he also starts out as the worst.
Oh, I was thinking a different character. How far are you?
I had first two.
There's 4 seasons to this. It's really like a TV show with a new episode every week. But those of you who wish to binge on the whole thing at once, we've just started season 4, which will be the final season.
Now we get to rec time. R-E-C, not W-R-E-C-K, where everything will be fine.
You never let me have any fun.
You can wreck the wreck.
Okay.
So, tell us about a novel or a story that is centered in a non-romantic relationship that you love and that you want everyone to read.
Can it be a children's book?
Well, obviously, yeah.
Oh, okay, all right, because those are easier.
Those are easier. I'm going to start because to give you guys a little bit of time to think about it. And mine is a bit of a cheat because that is one of 2 possible interpretations of it. That is Amal al-Mukhtar's story, Seasons of Glass and Iron.
Oh, yeah.
Which some people think is a lesbian love story, and I think is about a quasi-sisterly friendship. And I think both interpretations are valid, but I think mine is right. And it is one of my favorite short stories of recent years. I love it so much. I want everyone to read it.
I'd like to add, that makes a lot of sense because Amal, I know Amal and her friendship circle very well, and she has a big core of women friends who have this extremely Anne of Green Gables passionate friendships with each other. Very 19th century, so it makes sense that she would write that.
It can be difficult for me to think of them. I'm going to semi-cheat, and I'm going to say Murderbot. which I believe you're publishing, right, Didi? You're publishing?
I may or may not be publishing the first Murderbot novella this week.
How about next week?
No, this week. Tomorrow. Don't tell anyone. It's a secret.
Yeah. Murderbot's a fabulous character. The first one is All Systems Red. So is it just the first one that's coming out?
It is.
And then you'll want the rest of them. But I'm lucky because people will send me books and say, will you read this, Anne, and put your name on it as liking it. And so I've been able to read all 4 of the novellas because I say, can I please have the book? And they go, oh yes, we'll give it to you right before it comes out. And so over the whole 4 novellas, part of a big driver, although Murderbot is very opaque about its feelings about various things, except it's also very snarky. There's one particular relationship that drives its major actions, and that relationship is not romantic. That relationship is with a person who finally it will admit is its favorite person. And the resolution of that is not a romantic resolution. It's more of a friendship, right? There is a power differential there, but they're also working against the power differential. I don't want to spoil it, but I think you should totally all read Murderbot, because Murderbot's awesome.
Who's it by?
Martha Wells.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Oh my God, we have totally left out one of the great modern friendship tropes. But first, Didi, say something about murder. Will you say something about murder?
I was just going to say it's כשל מערכות יומני רובו רצח, ספר אחד, in Hebrew.
Yay! Which is My Gay Best Friend. That's a big friendship thing. I don't know if it ever drives the plot. It should. But the one I'm going to recommend very highly is Holly Black's Tithe, which is a wonderful contemporary fantasy novel. I don't know if it's been published in Hebrew.
I don't believe so.
Oh, but it was written, but I don't think it's hard to read. And it's about
let me just ask, how many people here read in English?
A lot.
So, yeah.
And can I ask who's read anything by Holly Black? Okay, so yeah, good.
Ronnie has published 2 of the Curse Workers series.
Those, I think, are actually better than the ones that have been a bigger noise. Holly Black's Curse Worker are really good. She writes a lot about friendship. She has very close friendships. And in Tithe, it's the My Gay Best Friend, who's a boy, and it's also, they're really lovely because these are written about teens, although I think they're a wonderful read even if you're not one. The boy is afraid to come out. He has the support of the girl, the straight girl who loves him and understands him and isn't going to judge him, and as well as the My Gay Best Friend, the gay guy who will always help you, poor straight girl, with all your problems. I think those are beautiful friendships that are being written about more and more.
I want to say a word for Rosemary Kirstein, who wrote. Has anybody read any of her books here? She wrote a few years back. Her first book was called The Steerswoman, and it was a while ago. But it is now. She has republished all of the series as ebooks, and they are about a community of women who find things out, and if you ask a steerswoman a question, she is required to answer it honestly. And if a steerswoman asks you a question, you are required to answer it honestly. And if it is ever discovered that you have lied to a steerswoman, no steerswoman will ever answer your questions or speak to you, which in this particular world, which is very dependent on practical information for survival, is a big deal. And there is no indication. She is friends with, she makes friends and she travels and she makes notes and sends things back. Did I just turn this on? I could have. Yes, I did just turn it on. As she travels, she makes friends with people, and she is friends with steerswomen. But it's all about friendship, because even though when Rosemary started writing these things, there was no idea of asexual. this woman clearly is. I mean, there's never, she's never attracted to anyone. She is entirely, this is a person, I like them, this is a person, I don't like them. These people I am very close to, these people not so much. And it's so completely natural and unself-conscious because it's just the way Rosemary writes. And they're beautifully written, they're really exciting. There's a really long arc over the series, but each book is just beautifully structured. And you know, full disclosure, she's in my writing group and I've known her for 30 years, but she's a remarkable writer.
What a great answer.
She also has a swordswoman there. She starts with the fight with.
Yes, that's true. You're right. I had forgotten. Yes, you're right. And,
So,
Are they
Yeah.
friends after? I haven't read them.
yeah.
I've been
Yes,
hearing
they're
as you
very
read them.
close. Yes, and they.
two women starts with the fight, one swordswoman, one the opposite, and then ends with a beautiful friendship.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Oh,
It absolutely does.
yeah.
And given the cultures that they come from, it makes complete sense. Yeah.
I'm going to give a shout out to another novel, which does have a romantic relationship, but where a sisterly relationship is much, much more important, and that is Roses and Rot by Kat Howard, which is a book
They're
I...
literal sisters, right?
They're literally sisters.
There are some very good books about sisters and brothers,
Yeah,
but that's that other thing.
No, philia literally means brotherly love.
Right, but it's not, I don't know, I got lost. Oh, yeah, okay. No, you said there were 4 and one of them was a family one.
Yeah, but that's more parent-child.
Oh, okay. We could do a lot on
We can talk.
sisters and
We can
brothers.
talk.
Yeah. I've always heard that one translated as motherly love. That's the.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, storgy. Storgy? I don't know. I don't speak ancient Greek or modern Greek.
I had a Dutch friend who told me a Dutch word that didn't exist in English, and I've forgotten the word itself, but it's this feeling you get right here in your stomach when you really love someone, often a child. And I think that's a Dutch word for what you're talking about.
That sounds like a German word.
No, well,
yeah.
Dutch and German.
Well, Dutch
are
and
related,
German,
but-
yeah.
Yeah. But I certainly, you know, I'm not a mother, but I certainly can feel this for particular children, and it really does sort of happen just here.
So, do you have a sisterly or brotherly Rex?
I haven't been thinking about it, so it would take a little while
Okay.
to come up with. Is it
Yes, it is. We are just at, yeah. So, folks with questions, if you have questions, I'm going to have you come on down here if you can and ask your questions to the microphone, which I will bring.
And I want someone to ask a question about Slash, because I have this really good speech I could make about it relevant to this panel.
Yeah, no.
So while you're thinking,
Physically
just
come
tell us
on
about
down.
all right, so here's my thing about Slash relevant to this panel as you make your way down to.
No, apparently they want to raise their hand, but not come on down. Come on down.
You want to volunteer?
No, she's talking while you're coming down. That's the thing.
I'm talking while you're coming down. Here goes. 3, 2, 1. Because the male romances are so attractive to everybody, one theory I've heard for why women love to write. Okay, first of all, does everybody know what I mean by Slash? Is there anybody who's kind of like, what?
Is there anyone who does not
All right,
know what
good.
slash
Then
fiction
I
is?
can educate you at the same time. So the Kirk-Spock relationship in the original Star Trek is this extremely strong and emotional friendship. Very emotional for the viewer. Reasonably emotional for the participants. And very early on in the world as we know it, women primarily started writing stories in which Kirk and Spock had a physical romance, or at least, you know, declared their emotional romances to each other. Usually, you know, through being forced to do so by drugs or, you know, something. And this was known to the community as Kirk and then slash, you know, the typographical things slash Spock stories. Kirk slash Spock, and that is where the word slash came from, which means, initially in fanfic of any kind, something where you took two male characters who liked each other a lot but weren't having sex and turned them into a physical couple. People better versed in fanfic than I can elaborate for a very long time on the subtleties and differences and distinctions that have come up since then, but the word has also come to mean in American usage any time, not just in fanfic, I mean, people could say, like in Sword's Point, that Richard and Alec have a slashy relationship, even though they were never people who didn't have one that a fanfic, anyway, you get what I'm saying, right?
So basically, you just did a whole thing about adding sex to my panel about taking sex out.
Yeah, I did, because, in darkness we see light. When I was writing this book, I had never heard of anybody else doing this thing about romantic love between men that was really sexy. And I was desperately looking for somebody to tell me why I was finding this so sexy. And Joanna Russ who's a great American feminist and critic as well as science fiction writer, Joanna Russ, had written an essay specifically about Kirk Spock, and her suggestion, which has to do with this panel, is that women found these relationships really, really appealing, but saw no place for themselves in it and wanted to insert themselves. That they found these male buddies very, very appealing, and there were no female buddies. And so they wanted to be one of the male buddies, and therefore they sort of, in some senses, the writer would slash herself into that relationship by being both of them. That's all. Thank you. Next question.
Okay, just introduce yourself, say who you are, and then ask a question. A question is a short sentence that ends with a question mark.
Hi, my name is Aaron. The question is, why are we so conservative regarding romantic love, even when talking about not necessarily heterosexual love? It's always a couple, or usually a couple, and not different structures. Even Robin Heinlein, when you wrote The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, wrote a chain family. Still, it was the husband brought a single wife, and then the wife went into the community.
Once you get, that was a really great question, because in fact science fiction has a lot of non-traditional romances and families, right? I mean, that's what we're here for.
I think so, yeah, and but at the same time, I think the majority of stories, when they're going to wrap up, they wrap up with a one-on-one. I think often.
Laurie J. Marks has written an entire series of novels about a culture that deals in accumulative families. So you marry out, but you're either marrying a man or a woman. It doesn't matter when he or she comes into the family. Everybody raises the children. It's a real communal model. And there's another woman who did it years before, and the name has really left the building. But I can think of several
there are
books.
Definitely more than in, for instance, mainstream. I can't imagine a mainstream popular book that does not end, that has a poly situation or and there's certainly more, but there is a strong cultural pressure even in science fiction.
But I feel like Le Guin went somewhat that way in the thing.
Oh yeah, the Sederetu. What's the?
And there's some other ones. Maureen McHugh, I think, has done some of that as well.
Jim Hines has that in the Libriomancer series, which I have not read, but
I haven't read Libriomancer.
People
It's
who
out.
love it really
So it's
love
out there, and science fiction is very much the place for it. Science fiction and fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, more so than other places. But you're right, it is a thing, right? I don't know why.
When we talk about romantic love in stories, we often talk about commitment and jealousy and love triangles and so on. Do you think this trope can be applied to friendship?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Oh, a great book that's not science fiction, but a writer you might want to read, Margaret Atwood's Cat's Eye. That's the one, right? Cat's Eye, which is about the toxic friend who comes into your friendship group, which I have actually had happen to me, and it's a brilliant, The Robber Bride.
It is The Robber Bride.
The Robber Bride by Margaret Atwood is very much about, the worm in the apple of friendship and someone who's crazy and does it on purpose.
And I think that it's one of those things, frequently when you're writing, especially I have seen this in YA books, where in fact there is a great deal in any high school or any friendship group of either sex. It's like, I thought you were my best friend. why do you like her? Or you can't hang out with this person because I don't like them. But people don't tend to write about that because it is unattractive. And if your heroine can be possibly the victim of it, but it would be very difficult for her to be feeling that way, although it is one of the most basic human feelings, is that this is mine and I don't want anybody else to, I need to come first.
Isn't it interesting that it's unattractive when it's in a story about women being friends with women, but it's absolutely a plot driver when it's a romantic story about a guy feeling jealous about his wife? Isn't that interesting?
Hi, my name is Ido. I'd like to ask, how would you write about a growing relationship between two characters in a story in a way that will not come out, you know, in a way that won't come out shallow, or, you know, like cliches, or
Well, I think you do it the way you do almost anything in writing, is that when you have a character, you have a human being about which you know a lot of things, and that they talk about things that don't have to do with the plot every once in a while. That they have interests, that they're two full human beings, and they are not constructs you are moving through the plot. And when then they relate to each other, you will have two human beings relating to each other who are not just saying, you know, there's a guy behind that thing who's about to hit you with an arrow. Then you're much less likely to fall into any kind of trope if you have real people and you're not thinking, I am going to have a friendship. You know, you make two people who will like each other.
Yeah,
you need to know how each of them feels about ice cream.
I feel like, I think I know what you're saying about falling into cliches. There are certain, like, signifiers, right? There are moments, and sometimes the story is just signifier, next signifier, next signifier, oh, that's the relationship. And to a certain extent, you want some of those because that does help your reader understand where you're going, but you want to not rely entirely on those and maybe back off of them, maybe suggest them more than just put them flat. Oh, now it's time for the kiss. Now it's time for the misunderstanding. Now it's time, you know. So don't forget those things because they can be helpful, but don't rely on them. Those are just signposts. They're not the majority. They're not the actual relationship.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to another relationship, which is I just thought of, which is the mentor-mentee relationship. Oh, yeah. Specifically in Sean McGuire's October Date series, Toby's relationship with Quentin, who becomes her squire, is a very interesting and cool one. Next question.
Hi, my name is Leah. I just want to double back to the slash thing a little bit, because what I have noticed is that one of the big conflicts surrounding slash is that people feel you can have only one or the other. When people say, can't two men just be friends, it's perceived as being an attack on all slash sometimes. By some people I've known, at least.
Yeah, I know the arguments you're talking about.
As a reader and as a writer and as a fan, how do you balance that? How do you allow both of these things to coexist?
That's a tough question because I feel like there's a lot of nuance that gets lost in that argument. Because, for instance, I feel, and I know Ellen said the other day, I don't know if this was in the panel or in a private conversation, maybe it was here, my mind is going, that now we're much more open, you did say it this morning, now we're much more open about sexual relationships, for instance, between men. Men are ashamed of and afraid to express passionate friendship. And I think that's part of what's happening is that as soon as you say, but oh, I want these guys to be friends, and that's really important, the folks who are rightfully really happy and relieved that finally we can just talk about romance and sex between guys say, wait a minute, you're trying to push me back into the closet. And that's an understandable reaction, but it's also not always what's happening when you say, but I want them to be friends. And I'm not sure how to get to the place where you can say for everybody, you know what, both are okay. I'm kind of hoping the pendulum sort of swings back to the middle where we say, you know what, some guys, they want to kiss. And some guys, they're just really good friends. They're not just really good friends, but I feel like the more nuance that we can use talking about those relationships, the better. But I guess sometimes we just have to be patient with the folks who are just like, no, 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 don't take away my thing that I haven't ever had and now I've got. But it's an unpleasant place to be, and I know what you're talking about. I've seen those arguments, and I made the mistake of saying the thing once about, have we lost something in assuming that every intense relationship between guys must have been sexual or must be sexual? And some folks were like, well, but, and I'm like, I know where you're coming from, but let's not argue about this anymore, right? So yeah, it's a really hard place to be, I think.
Hi, I'm Lily. When Didi asked you about pieces where there is romance and there is friendship, but the friendship is the focus and the romance it sort of comes and goes, I could think of tons of examples, and all of them were sitcoms. So coupling, Friends, Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place. Almost every sitcom has a really, really strong friendship base, and then relationships come and go around. Do you think it's something to do with format? Do you think it can be done with a book, with writing?
Well, the thing about a sitcom is that nobody ever really changes, and that there's a central nucleus of some kind into which people come and go. And in something like All of the Family, it's the family. In the ones that you talk about, I mean, Friends is pretty self-explanatory, 20-somethings, but the whole point is that they're friends. So it's in the title very frequently. And so the assumptions that are made is that you are watching, that all of the romances are going to be out of the friendship circle because that's what the plot is. So because that helps drive each episode.
It's a series, so I think what Dilia's saying is it's a series structure. You know, something has to be stable, and yeah, things come and go, and they don't change. You don't want to see them change. I mean, seeing people change in television is a pretty recent development. So, yeah.
And you can do it in a novel if it's really episodic. I mean, if we go back to something like, you know, the structure of the 18th century novel, which is this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, rather than the carefully plotted arc. It's you can do that, but in a carefully plotted arc, it's a lot harder.
Hi, my name is Ophir, and in Robin Hobb's books, you have the Farseer trilogy, and then the Tony Mann trilogy, and then the Face of the Fall trilogy, where the relationship between the two, it's like it evolves between, in the first trilogy, they're friends, and then in the end of the trilogy, they just become really good friends. And then in the second trilogy, where I like it the most, the Fool says multiple times that he loves him beyond a friendship or romantic relationship, and Fitz has really had time accepting it. And then in the third book, when in the third trilogy, where the Fool says to Fitz that
get to the point. We do not need a summary of three trilogies.
No, I do actually.
And in the third trilogy, where Fitz's daughter is also the Fool's daughter, because magic. Like, what do you think about this kind of evolving relationship where it's not just a friendship, it's not just a romantic relationship, it's a little bit of everything?
It's exciting, I think, when a writer can pull that off. I was going to say, oh, you can only do that in fantasy, but I think the trick that she pulls in that, yes, but it's a spiritual. We're talking at this point about spiritual connection, and I think that, feel free to argue with me, but let me finish. I think that when I say we can only do that in fantasy, it's because people are so allergic to that sort of writing in realism now that this is the last place left for it, the way Delia was saying about Tolkien and stuff.
You could do it in something realistic, but it took her 9 books. You know, it takes you, it's something that I think is easier to figure out if you've got plenty of time to do it. And there aren't that many 9-book series in which you've got the luxury to have a realistic trajectory that really fully explores each phase of a very long-term relationship that changes and grows. I mean, it's like a family saga. And which the naturalistic novel was for many years, was like family sagas, and you would have things like that. You know, they were heterosexual, clearly, but because of when they were written, but they did follow long trajectories of changing relationships.
Hey, I'm Lee, and my question is, so do we really have to leave sex and physical intimacy out of friendship? Because mononormativity asks us to put love, romantic love, and friendship in 2 different boxes, where romantic love is obviously more important and more significant in your life, but it also asks us to have a very strict dichotomy between what is sexual and what is non-sexual. And once sex comes in, this relationship automatically must turn into a romantic relationship. Can we have friendship that have some sort of physical intimacy or sexuality represented in books without them automatically turning into romantic love?
I think in real life we obviously can, because plenty of people do, as you say. I think it's harder in books because those the narrative templates and tropes are so strong, and that sex is so much a signifier of a particular kind of relationship. It's that, because you don't have, you're doing things in a very small scale to represent symbolically things that would take years to happen in real life. And that's been a signifier of, oh, they kiss, they have sex, suddenly it's romance. So in order to do it in the book, you'd have to sort of undercut that really hard, at least as things exist now, until a new pattern was set. I think it's difficult to do because of the strength of that narrative trope, right?
I also think that it's difficult because of the way society and morality, and I speak strictly for America because it's the only thing I'm qualified to speak for, is organized. I mean, if you have a woman who has friends with benefits, she is going to be perceived as a slut, and she is going to be reviewed as a slut, and if she's supposed to be the main character and is supposed to be completely sympathetic, that book is going to have a very hard time selling. It's going to have to be awfully damn good. And
you mean like the one I'm writing?
Well, yeah, and so it makes that makes people very chary about writing about it, and I think that setting it in a fantasy, in a long ago and far away setting, the way Ellen has, is about the only way you can get away with it. But people are going to have difficulty with that character, and because America's become very prudish. And so I think that is the answer to your question, is that it's harder to couch it in such a way that you're not going to have the internet coming down on you with a ton of bricks.
Yeah, but the internet will come down on you pretty much whatever.
Yeah, there's always going to be somebody who's going to take issue with what you've written. But it is harder because more people take issue and they go, well, this character's really unlikable. And of course that's code for, she's not ideal, she's a slut,
Unrelatable.
Unrelatable, yeah. And when editors start saying she's unrelatable, then you've got a bigger problem. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure Nora Jemisin heard about the protagonists.
Oh, you bet.
Broken Earth.
You know she did, and
yeah.
she went ahead and did it anyway, which is what you do when you're a writer. You just do it anyway.
Hold your ground.
I also want to give a shout out to one more work that is not about romantic love, and that is Steven Universe, which is a kids show that I love, and apparently you love too, and that's awesome. Which has romantic love in the background and in the history of characters, but is not about that. So I also love that. And we have pretty much reached the end of our panel. I would like to thank the amazing and wonderful Anne Leckie, Delia Sherman, Alan Kostner, and you wonderful people for coming here and listening to us and asking questions. And now we will go.